Good idea.
Hello, welcome to the Conscious Good Creators Network and Integral Cinema Project. This is a gathering to meet and discuss the TV series Undone, which is from Amazon, which is a wonderful series about a young woman having a major life experience or possibly going crazy. There's a couple different interpretations there. And we're the Integral Cinema Project. Our purpose is to try to help people see a wider field of view and understand more different dimensions of different works of art. And we're going to kind of use Undone as an example. And I'd like to introduce Mark Allen Kaplan. He is the executive director and creator of the Integral Cinema Project, and he's the leading world expert in the application of integral theory to the moving image. And it's all you. Take it away, Mark.
Thanks, Jonathan. Hello, everybody. So before we begin, I want to just do a little bit of a perception exercise for us, which we kind of do. Let me fix there I go. I think that's good. So just get in sit in a comfortable position. And for this one, eyes open or closed, just whatever feels comfortable for you. And I just want us to bring ourselves to an awareness of our breath for a moment. And reflect on where we're at right now. The space we're in, this time, this moment in time. And think about waking up this morning and what that experience was. And then also open your awareness to any kind of thoughts you have about the future. Later today, what you're going to do after this call. Any kind of thoughts you have about that. And now, see if you could ponder what it would mean to your reality if that past, this present, and that future were all happening simultaneously right now. How would you hold that differently? Now, I also want you to now think about what's happening around us in the world. And any kind of reflections or thinking about parts of our lives that appear to be being undone. Things that we thought were kind of solid and concrete and going to be here forever. Things that were a certain way we thought that are now seeming like something else. And now in this space, I just want to kind of bring our attention to this moment that we're in. That we're in this reality of a pandemic around us. If you're in the United States, we're in a very turbulent field politically. And even for the structures of our very country, what we thought our country was. As we look out and see all of these things happening that don't necessarily fit in with what we hoped would be. And just being with that undoingness and being open to what the bigger meaning is, what the bigger purpose is. All right, and then you can open your eyes. And I want to start with a reflection, and then we'll go around, and then we'll share what we're experiencing and reflecting on. And the connection here for me with Undone to this moment is actually quite profound. And it actually, for me, it gives a great kind of frame for us to hold some of the stuff that's happening. That there's an undoing happening. So in this story that we've seen in Undone, this woman's whole foundation for her reality is being undone. And at the end, we don't know if it's madness or if it's an awakening. And we could look back on the whole process and see signs of both. And we could easily interpret both. And that's kind of where we are as a civilization in a way. We're in this moment where it's like, this could be a great awakening. And this could be a descent into madness. It could be both and. And this moment right now, here we are today. It's interesting because yesterday on the Twitterverse, we reflect on the big things happening on the Twitterverse anyways, that this moment is a major bifurcation point in the big transition. Two things happened yesterday, according to the Twitterverse, that are groundbreaking in terms of our undoingness. One is what a lot of people are seeing happening in Portland, Oregon. And there is a escalation in this descent in the United States, or this pattern in the United States, where the supposed military personnel, unknown military personnel, are kidnapping citizens, and that the state and local governments are actually bringing it like there's a conflict now between federal and state. And some people are perceiving this as a major shift into the slide into an authoritarian state. At the same time, major people in the tech industry are talking about a paradigm shift in technology happening yesterday. This release of an AI software framework, or an AI program called GPT-3. And a lot of the techies are going, this is it, the future's here, and all this stuff. We don't know if that's true or not, but it's interesting to kind of get, all right, so here we have this big breakthrough in AI, and they're saying this AI can actually create works of art and original philosophical thinking. And what that means if that is true. What does that mean for who we are? For what our purpose is in the world, for our function. So here we have this profound undoing that we're in, potentially. And so how do we hold that? You know, and I think what's beautiful about this work, Undone, is this being with it, going with the, you know, like going with the undoing and holding the undoing as this liminal field. And we, the viewer, as we're going through it, we're kind of like, you know, it's kind of like we kind of ping pong between, is this madness or is this, you know, and understanding that that's kind of what, at least what I'm doing through all of this, is like, is this really happening? Are we really, you know, I mean, is this really the future that we're going to be having? Is this going to be a dystopian or a utopian future? The signs are for both, you know, this, you know, this whole, and the idea of the madness and the spiritual and the madness, this is a very ancient pattern. You know, there's these phrases that, you know, the line between madness and genius is very thin. And the line between a prophet and a mental patient is also very thin in our civilization, right? So it's like people who speak in tongues are either in insane asylums or are in churches and religious, you know, like, you know, what's the difference? Where's the line? You know, it's like, so all of this, I think it's a great kind of work to work with our being able to be with the undoingness of our reality and trying to be open to what's supposed to unfold. How do we go with that unfolding and embrace that undoing? So now I just want to open it up to other reflections on that. Oh, one more thing before I forget. This, what happened yesterday, is a great example of what we're always talking about in terms of the transition that we're in, being this gap between our consciousness and technology. So I just wanted to make this point real quick, because this is like a lived example of what we've been talking about. And that is the gap between our technology, the cutting edge of our technologies, which now, if what we're reading on Twitter is correct, our technologies have now pushed into the transpersonal stage of development. And if what's going on in Oregon turns out to be true as well, that represents the lowest structure where we have systems of power. That's the mythic authoritarian structure. So we have this, so there is in one day a picture of that hole, that gap between where our highest ideals are moving our technologies, and where our lowest structures and fears and struggles are pulling us into this. So we've got about a 5-stage gap that we have to navigate in this undoing. Okay, now open. Sorry.
Yeah, I'd like to go first if I can. Sorry for missing the last 2 months. I don't know what happened. I got the time wrong or something. But for me, this movie, this series was really mind-blowing because they've taken live action and created a cartoony effect of it with rotoscoping. And in my actual life, I'm involved in a lot of VR. And this week, our VR avatars, which are kind of like stick men, a bit like Simpsons, not very real, got an upgrade. And they're becoming more like real people. So I saw these two convergences of the two things. So I was watching it thinking, oh my God, we're going to be there soon, you know? So it was very meaningful for me. And plus, I'm involved in a lot of world buildings, and we can teleport from one to another, and all sorts of things can go on. And it was very similar to Undone. It was very similar to the series. So I found myself going, oh, goosebumps, you know, when things happened. And also in some of the VR games, you'll try and solve a puzzle and you don't get it right, and you go back to the beginning. Like she was going back and back and back until she finally got it right. I'm seeing a lot of that in what I'm involved in at the present. So I was like, wow. So I was hell bent on being on this call so I could partake what had happened to me. So that's my input. It was fascinating.
Beautiful, man. That's another level of the undoing that is happening. We could feel it. Like this, there's an undoing happening. This field. Beautiful, man.
It explores different perceptual fields as she goes back. She's re-experiencing it in a different way each time, and it's resolving in different directions. So you can feel this sense of her ground is just slipping away from her, and she has no idea what's what, which would typically be a pluralistic idea of just never knowing what's real and having all these different realities. But it does feel like there's an overarching purpose to this journey that she's on. Like it's stripping things away and she's learning more and beginning to understand more, or at least the audience is.
Wow. Oh wait, man, that's beautiful, because I just got this, that part of this undoing process is our old sense of where the ground is shifts, and we have to find a new ground. And the undoing is that the ground is pulled away from us. And we could either try to reach down to the old ground that's falling away and hang on to it for dear life, that old ground, no matter what's going to happen around us, or we have to let go and try to ride this wild process until we find a new ground. That's beautiful, man. I didn't really think of it that way.
And then also we could talk a little bit about the 4 quadrants that this show is communicating across the interior individual and the exterior individual and the collective domains, the interior and the individual and the exterior. And watching this as it's ping-ponging, it's sort of unpacking her personal history all the way back to her mother's trauma that's living through the family, and the way that trauma reverberates through the next generation. And it's just looking at a lot of different elements there. That was actually a generational trauma from war, as I recall, wasn't it? That the mother left. And so it's beautiful the way she travels back and she begins to understand her mother's insanity, but also her mother's gift, and try to figure that out.
Yeah, and the undoing happens in all four quadrants. And so you can even see it in the objective quadrant with the pictures on the wall being rearranged. It's like, so the undoing of our physical realities. Wait a minute, it's like, so the undoing is happening in all the four dimensions. Internally, it's affecting her relationships, the undoing of different relational structures, and this objective, kind of thing, and then the whole world itself. So it's kind of exploring all four, in the process of undoing. So Lynn, are you feeling anything there? Or are you just?
I'm almost speechless about it. It is so profound and beautiful. All the care that they put into making that, with all the details and all the different levels and perspectives, it's just astounding. And having two close relatives with schizophrenia, it's like it's got me really wanting to know more about their internal experience. It just must be. I mean, now I understand more about what might be going on inside of them when they're quiet and listening to something, or watching something that we can't see. I think I'm in a fairly good place as far as kind of ready for the groundlessness, because I've been doing a lot of Zen work, a lot. And so just kind of being in that place. And is there only one season of that show so far? Wow. I crave to know more of the story. So, but I also will say that I am old-fashioned in a way with the whole AI, all these things. It's just like, I want to say, why do we have to keep going in that direction when, it's like everybody knows there seems to be something really dark there. So why would we want to go there? I don't understand that part of mankind.
It's hard to know if what's dark there is what we project into it, or what's actually there, or what's dark is that we know that humans are dark, so we figure that whatever technology is developed is going to be used for dark purposes.
So
AI has so much potential for light as well.
I like to hear that, because I've listened to a couple of talks by people who are pretty involved, who are just like, talk about letting the genie out of the bottle. It's like, it's there's going to be a point where it's not us, it's them. And I guess that brings out my kind of back to nature side. Like, isn't this a pretty nice place we have here? Isn't this, couldn't we build on something? But I understand that there's always something in humanity that wants to push and grow. And sorry about the background. My husband's on coding.
Oh, yes.
And that show really kept his attention too, which I will say is he's not usually into series. And we sat down and just watched them all in one night. So I'm very curious to see where this conversation will go today. And whoever made that, I'm really grateful that they did. I keep thinking, we've wondered about whether family members would like to see it or whether it would be too painful for them.
Yeah. You bring up a couple really important kind of points here. One, of course, is how we understand madness, or what we call madness. It's really interesting. Emanuel Swedenborg, who was a scientist and a spiritualist, I think he invented kerosene, actually, and all sorts of this wild stuff. Anyways, he kind of, that towards the end of his life, he began to have like visions of heaven and hell, and he would like head into these altered states where he would, kind of like basically he traveled the whole spiritual
Yeah.
realm. And he had this theory that everything we call madness is really people who are exposed to that realm in various ways and they're unprepared for it.
Mhm.
So the voices that a schizophrenic hears, he believed were actual voices from the spirit dimension.
Mhm.
And and more recent kind of theories about this and ancient theories that connect with it is one way we could look at it is that from the collective self dimension, if our collective self is beyond space and time, which is fundamental to that concept. So, and that consciousness is local and non-local and trans-temporal, then in that collective self is every thought that has ever happened, that is happening now, and that will happen. Every life that has happened, will happen, and is going to happen. All of that is like inside of this big field that we could tap into. And so if a person's biochemical makeup make them more susceptible to different dimensions and they have no idea and their culture doesn't know how to frame it.
Yeah.
So like you'll get, for example, in primitive cultures, there's a tribe in Africa that does not have any mental illness.
Hmm.
Because everything that we call mental illness, they view as signs from the gods.
Right. Right.
And in the and they have a prescription for each one and what the calling of that is. And that the people who are going through that are touched by God and they're considered special.
Right. Right. There's a
And
lot
so there's this, so, and those people are not crazy.
of,
They
right.
can actually function in their society just fine.
And they maybe have a
Because
special role. Yeah.
certain role.
Yep.
So, that's so that, and in a way, this work kind of is playing with that concept.
Yes.
And I could see it if I was creating it, that would be right now, everything that is there fits this scenario perfectly. That it is that shamanic perspective, that madness is this connecting to this other realm
Mm.
without a ground or
Right.
without a capacity to hold it in a healthy way. And then the other thing about the AI is, once again, from the collective self, let's hold that frame because it's a really kind of interesting frame to hold this stuff at, so we can look at patterns, is as our technologies advance from stage to stage, they help humanity evolve. So really what we're seeing, what the fear around AI really is, I believe, it's an underlying unconscious fear because we know at some level we're not ready for that.
Mm-hmm.
That is way beyond. It's like, Jonathan was talking about in one of our talks, when we exploded the first bomb, the first nuclear bomb, Oppenheimer was basically like, oh shit, man, this is,
Yeah.
We're way out of our league here.
We have
And
become
so,
Shiva, destroyer of worlds.
Yeah.
so what you're seeing, AI is actually an evolutionary move. It's just we are so far behind that it's like, oh my, excuse me. It's like, oh fuck, man, this is like we don't know how to handle this.
So that dilemma is it feels like it's something that's being inflicted upon the large, I mean, it's like is this a large force, a worldwide force that is carrying forward that desire for AI, or is it a couple of mad geniuses who like tinkering? I don't understand it.
All right, so here's,
Kevin
let's look at
Kelly's
the
book.
evolutionary arc, you know, of technology and consciousness here for a minute. You know, that's, all right, so you've got, as we evolve, there's first the cutting edge of our evolution at each stage. It's like, so let's go back to the Industrial Revolution. So at that point, the mythic structure had been, in effect, operationally the foundation of civilization for over 1,000 years. Pretty solid.
Yeah.
Okay. Feudal systems, you know, agricultural societies, and all the structures, the us, them, the king and queen, the master slave, all of those kind of structures, pretty solid. And the technologies were the bows and arrows and spears and all that stuff, and it's like, and then we get a few people at the cutting edge of the rational. So you get a Da Vinci. You get these people who are, exploring the cutting edge. They wake up first. So large blocks of people don't instantly wake up. First, some of the cells in our collective self start waking up, and then then they start to kind of look around and share, and then that builds up, and then they get together and they'll create art from it. They'll create tools from it, and any kind of art or tools that they create from that new structure then gets out to others, and others start playing with it, and then playing with it, we then start to get that structure of consciousness. It starts to support it, because using that tool, our brains start laying down different neural pathway structures.
Yeah, it's very interesting, but it's also not very soothing when thinking about where we are now.
Yeah, wait. So
okay.
The Industrial Revolution was a shift from one stage, mythic, to another stage, to the next stage, rational.
Yeah.
And it was a very turbulent time, but we made it through, but it took a while. But what happened is that technology sped up technology's advancing itself.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And each stage accelerates it further. So when we got to the pluralistic, the internet, that accelerated everything even further, or the computer. When we got to the computer, all right, so first, the first phase of the Industrial Revolution was mechanical. And then it became digital, right? And then it became this global network, patterning of information. So, and each stage accelerated the advance of technology itself. And so now within, let's see, how many years has it been since the Industrial Revolution? Is it 300, 200, between 200 and 300, I think? All right, so within 200 and 300 years, our technology has now, if reports on Twitter are correct, has now went 5 stages ahead from the rational, or 4 stages ahead of the rational,
of the mythic,
of the Industrial Revolution. And our consciousness has not kept pace.
Yeah.
so but the shift now that we find ourselves in is like, yeah, it would have been great if we would have had 1,000 years for each stage, man, so we can, get out all the kinks. But that's just not the way it is. These technologies, each major advance accelerates the advance even more. The problem is that we have not been working on our consciousness with the same level of intensity and,
Right.
and accelerating that. And that's what we're trying to do. That's our hope. So, but yes, so it is terrifying, but AI is basically, it's what we've been going through with the new technology each stage and that acceleration, but it's way, way accelerated. Now we're talking about an acceleration because these new technologies can create their own new technologies themselves.
Okay.
So it's not just that in the past, humans created advanced technology, which accelerated human consciousness, which then accelerated, the next phase. And these technologies gave us tools that sped up our capacity to advance those technologies. Now the technology itself can be in charge of that.
Yeah.
And so this is a fundamentally radical. Everything that we know is undone in that moment.
Theoretically, I should say that
Theoretically.
most actual AI researchers are skeptical that this is going to happen as fast as Ray Kurzweil thinks, that in 20 years we're going to be replaced by an AI. So it's really not clear that general intelligence, or what they call it, is as easy as we think. But there's no question that certain kinds of learning neural networks are getting faster. But I want to kind of pull this a little bit back to Undone, since we're looking at the way it hybridizes different things. One of the things that makes for an integral work is, in this case, I thought her performance was fantastic. And there's real integration of the modern and the pre-modern, because she comes from a culture that has a pre-modern shamanic tradition, but she's a modern person. So there's that integration there where she ends up going back and finding some of it and having to explore those roots as well, which I think is something that a lot of people do in their lives, especially people who come from a culture with some grounding in pre-modern, with wisdom that's grounded in the pre-modern. And so she's having to integrate those, which I thought was a really nice element of this, integrating past and present. It has a really nice integration even of her relationship with her sister, and how she seems like the troubled one, but her sister actually who's the stable, normal one, actually has a lot of issues as well, is not a perfect person either. So it kind of, you're really seeing how all the people are complex people. Her father is a complex guy, her mother is a complex woman. So I really appreciated the way it gave each of the characters some layering that you don't often see.
That's beautiful. In a way, it's kind of like the undoing of our projections onto each other. So, her projection onto her father is undone.
Yep.
Right? The father, his projection on himself is undone. When he discovers, what he did.
That he actually committed a double murder, a murder-suicide.
A murder-suicide that he was repressing. And so his perception of himself that he was trying to hold on to.
Yeah.
Is undone. So it's like, and the relationship, and it's like, so there's this undoing at that level, which is beautiful.
Yeah. It's like everyone's undone. The sister's life was undone. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
The mother's idea that her family was okay was undone.
Undone. It's like, and also, how she was trying to protect her children, and then, is she hurting or is she helping? That whole, you know, she's coming up against that kind of struggle, you know, and that's becoming undone because at the beginning, she just believes that everything that she believes and wants and, you know, thinks her kids should be doing is the right way. And she's helping them.
Mm-hmm.
But then you get even like is her, you know, her projection of herself, you know.
Yeah.
You're just freezing up a little bit. Maybe we could talk a little bit about what makes this an integral work, because of course, the concept of undoing is a deconstructive concept, which would be pluralistic, which is a lower stage. The next stage after rational, the modern stage, the postmodern. Pluralistic stage is where you deconstruct everything before that. And there's a lot of deconstruction that happens in this. But typically in a pluralistic work, all points of view are regarded as equally true. And you're trying to like see this, oh, everyone has a truth. Everyone's truth is true for them. When you get to an integral work like this one, there is a higher, it feels as though there is a higher purpose and a higher truth that's being sought in this. Maybe you can talk a little bit more about that, Mark, and throw you a
Definitely.
softball.
All right. All right. Okay. Absolutely, man. So the difference is the undoing in this is happening within a higher field. So as we're watching all this undoing, she, the main character, and we have a sense of something bigger is going on. And even in her normal reality, other people sense that something bigger is going on. So when she and her boyfriend head to the company and that company and try to get, I think it's at the university security, and try to get the information about, you know, what happened that night in her father's lab. The way she tapped in to the security officer's life was way beyond normal. And the boyfriend was like, whoa, shit, what's going on, man? This is, and it's like, up to that point, you know, it was all in her head and stuff like that. But in that moment, he's seeing, whoa, wait a minute, how did you do that? How did that doesn't, you know, and just getting all that from those pictures is impossible. So there's something else. So all the way through, we have these hints that something more is going on. And that is the key to the integral structure when there's a deconstruction happening. So when we look at a classic integral work like The Twilight Zone, it begins with this mantra, which is basically setting us up that what we are going to see is wild and crazy and stuff like that, but there is something beyond that, that we just beyond our grasp of understanding. It's that capturing of that feeling that's the integral. That we could feel there's something happening beyond the character's understanding, beyond my understanding. And in that, the deconstruction is held not in a kind of firm, rooted grounding, but more like the cocoon around the caterpillar, you know, holding a frame around the deconstruction and the liminal field created by it. And we could go through and talk about how they do that in various points, but that is an example, that scene is an example of how you kind of do that in one way. there's other ways, you know, in how you shoot something and stuff like that, and your emphasis on that, the polarity, in this case, the polarity between is she going mad or is she awakening to a higher state of being? We're given examples of both that we could hold on to, but there's a stronger cinematic expression foundation for the higher state of being. The way the work is designed, so it's like the ending, that end moment. And she and her sister kind of get into this place of maybe it is madness, you know, and she just wants to one last look just to make sure that she doesn't go away thinking, oh, if I'd only stayed a little longer. And then the screen is filled with light and but we don't know. That's the end. But there the filmmaker is basically making a choice, a statement, saying there is something higher going on. Now, of course, he could come back and saying that that is a vision that inside of her own head, that it wasn't an actual thing. But the way they're doing it is very supportive of that higher purpose to the deconstruction.
In fact, in integral theory, there's a kind of dichotomy between waking up and growing up. And a lot of people, especially in the pluralistic field, are devoted to waking up, you know, doing yoga seminars and all these different things. But you kind of go through them and then you go back to where you started, and then you go do another one, you're back to where you started at the end of it. And you constantly feel as though you're being spiritual, but you're not necessarily building your growing up, you know, you're building your character. And there is a sense in this that she's growing up as well. And she's, the more she learns, the more she's beginning to find her way in this liminal space and learn to navigate it and not just be sort of irresponsible. I mean, the opening scene, she's driving like an insane person and she has a car accident. You know, that's our first experience of her, is that she's this very irresponsible, emotional person. And it really unpacks a lot of different domains of that, I would say, including even the role of religion. There's that sort of clash between her traditional religion and her mother's, I don't know if it's Catholicism or Christianity. I guess Catholicism, but there's that priest character who's also a perfectly lovely fellow, you know, trying to help her out. So it's kind of unpacking.
It really kind of plays with that. I know in Central and South American cultural fields, there is this dichotomy between Catholicism and the primal cultures, you know, the shamanic ways and the priest ways. And so this really kind of plays with that a lot, even to the point where the new priest is straddling the line between the two. So in this sense, that is another form of undoing, in a way. The priest is an integral priest because he's kind of undoing that separation between those two cultural fields. So any other reflections, ponderings, questions?
I'm just glad I'm here. I made it this time. Thank God.
It's great to have you here, Murray.
Yep. Yeah, we can talk a little bit about the main creators and the people who are also behind BoJack Horseman, some of the major people, which is also a pretty amazing animated integral show that explores uses absurd humor sometimes to explore very serious topics. So, and this
Yeah.
was, I guess, the one of the women who was the creators. This was her project. And it's also, you mentioned how it's rotoscope. The whole thing was shot in a studio, actually, and then they went to a Dutch company, and a lot of the paintings were done in the Netherlands. The backgrounds were all painted. So it was almost all shot in a little small room, actually, and they put all those
When was it
backgrounds.
made?
A year ago, I think.
A year ago.
Came out about a year ago. I
Yeah.
don't know if they're doing another season. If it got picked up, I think it's going to be a little bit of a long turnaround time because it's so labor intensive to do the show.
But in a way, the technology of the actual the use of that rotoscope animation was actually was used as part of the cinematic expression of Undoing. So there's moments where you literally like go, wait a minute, was this real or animated? Like there's this one scene where the girls are talking, and like there's this moment where their faces, you could almost feel like they almost become less animation and more real. And there's this feeling of this undoing of that barrier between fantasy and reality. So they're using that this kind of hybrid form of animation they're taking it and using its essential unique capacity as an archetypal field for that undoingness. So as we watch this, is it real or is it fantasy? Is embedded in the form itself. Is it real or is it animated? It's both, and or no.
Yeah,
So
there was a few scenes.
It's all part of the undoingness.
There
Beautifully
was
done.
a few scenes that I thought, is that gone to real movies? You know, and it was a painting. It's like, whoa, you know.
And that way we the viewer, get to experience some of that undoing this field ourselves as we're watching it. Which creates this very powerful symbiotic field between us, between the work and ourselves, especially during this time. It's like it really is kind of, so when I saw this work before last year, it was pretty cool and powerful, but now rewatching it, it's like, holy shit, man, now it's on steroids. You know, so it's like, it's just like, whoa, you know, the undoingness became so much more visceral and apparent viewing it at this moment. So it was almost like it was made for this moment for me.
Other things that were beautiful is the way it reflected in the upper right quadrant. The individual interior was reflected in the collective interior with her relationship with her boyfriend, who's also going through an experience of being an immigrant or being of another culture, but having moved to America. So he's American, but he's also Indian, and he's got to figure out what's even the generational trauma of that, and what is the kind of lived trauma or lived experience, how it informs his knowledge and experience.
And there's a great, for some reason, what you were saying triggered this other thought, which is there was this great moment where we get a real representation of the work of a shaman, where she finds out her boyfriend was like living this lie, you know, and she's really mad and she locks herself in the bathroom, right? And then she travels and she witnesses his life and everything that brought him to that moment. And that understanding shifted her whole field and her whole way of looking at him and their relationship and what he did. And there was a profound sense of real forgiveness, not, oh, I forgive you, but it's like, it's a kind of forgiveness where you recognize no malice was done. You recognize that the person was caught in their own stuff and coming from their own struggle to do what's right, or do what, to do what's right and to be loved. And then she opens the door and she's relating to him at a whole different level. And he's like, what? And it's like, I forgive you. And she's fine with the relationship and all that. And she really forgives him. That's a great representation of how the shamanic visioning has a transformative potential for both the shaman and then the others. So that's a great visualization and visceralization of the shamanic process. And there's healing in that relationship from the visioning.
Yeah, the show is really quite loaded in that way. I would say every scene and sequence is working on multiple levels. It's part of this patchwork of creating this purpose.
Yeah. So it's like really this amazing kind of loving deconstruction of time, space, and who and what we are, on an individual and collective level. Just mind-blowing to me. Pretty cool, this little work.
All right, any last thoughts from anyone? Lynn, Michael? All right, well, we're just about at an hour. Amazing. Actually going to end on time. Thank you very much for coming by and participating in this discussion. Thank you, Mark. Thank you to the Conscious Good Creators Network for giving us this home, and its founder, Trina Wyatt, who couldn't be with us today, but is here in spirit, I'm sure. And hopefully we'll see you all next month, the next Conscious Good.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
And to everyone who could not be here because they're experiencing part of the wild ride that we're on, taking them somewhere else, and if you're watching this now, just ride the undoing. So maybe all ride the undoing to find our ground.
Oh, I'm gonna remember that one. That's a good line. Thank you.
Ride the undoing. See you guys later.